In this video, we're going to take a look at different ways in which you can remove a section of a solid body using other tools in Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video we're going to tackle another subscriber's question, and this time it is still looking at removing sections or cutting up sections of a solid body, but we're going to take a look at several different ways in which we can do this. Now, first thing I want to note, I put a comment or a clip out that said I have started a Discord channel, so if anybody wants to join that, please email me support@caducator.com. Then make sure that you do just reach out and say you want to join the community. And we've already got a handful of people on there. It's a great place to ask questions and just show off your projects if you want. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this problem. So if you go to the description of the video, you can download this data set. It's just a chain guard for a motorcycle. I just threw it together as a sample, but what we're going to look at is removing a section of the top of it. But what we want to do is we want to sort of copy it, and we want to think about things like tolerances. So space between the two pieces and how we can actually 3D print them or manufacture them so that they can go together. So we're going to tackle this a couple different ways. We're going to look at the extrude tool. We're going to look at boundary fill. We're going to look at some surfacing tools and just see if we can explore a couple different ways to eventually get to the same or similar results. Now, when you're thinking about modeling something in 3D, in Fusion 360 or any CAD program, it's always important to understand what options you have. Now, when we talk about different options, what I mean is different ways in which you can achieve the same or similar results. So in Fusion 360, what we have is we've got extrude, we've got boundary fill, we've got combine, we have some surfacing tools that we can use. There are all these different tools that we could use to eventually create the same end goal. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to note that I have a midplane here. This is just something I tossed in because we might need it. We might not, I don't know. But I created that in there, and I also want to go ahead and create a new offset plane and just put this above my part. 80 millimeters should do. This will give me a nice place to start a new sketch. Again, it's important to note there are many different ways that we can do this. If I leave a way out and you think that it's a valid way, please leave a comment, let us know. And obviously, again, there are more than one way. There's more than one way to do this. So let's go ahead and select this top face, and I'm going to use project include and project and hit enter. The reason I like to do that is this sort of gives me a boundary to work with, and more importantly, it gives me some midpoints that I can reference. So using my line tool, I'm going to go from the midpoint of one end to the midpoint of another. Then I'm going to use my rectangle tool using center point, which will give me a midpoint here, and I can drag this out a distance of, let's say, 325 by 30 millimeters, just hitting tab to go between each of those. This center line here, I'm going to convert to construction because I don't need it. And I'm going to go ahead and just add two more rectangles. I'm going to go ahead and add one on each side here. And then I'm going to use my midpoint constraint for the end point of that construction line and the small end here. And we'll do the same thing over here, that end point and this small line. Then I'm going to use collinear between this edge and this edge, which allows me to just use one dimension to define this. And I'm going to just say 15 millimeters. That'll be fine. Now, I think it's important that we do understand the context of what we're doing. So let's go ahead and make this construction and this construction as well. You can also use X on the keyboard if you want. The reason I'm doing that is because it reduces the number of selectable profiles that I have, just makes it a bit easier when I'm extruding. But so the context of what we're doing here is we're going to take this and we're going to extrude a shape. Now, this extruded shape can be done in a number of different ways. We could sweep a shape from the front to the back. We could extrude it from that midplane, left to right. Again, there are many different ways that we can do this. We're just going to explore this way to get started, and we're going to have this sketch. It doesn't have to be this sketch. It can be anything, but this is going to be what we're working with. So now that I have this sketch above my part, the first thing I want to do is I want to start with extrude and select these regions. Now, when we have an extrude, typically what we do is we just start dragging it down and allow it to cut into our part. Now, obviously, that is not going to be the right solution because we've got some curvature here that we want to follow. Now, a couple different ways that we can do this. We can start by just extruding down to an object. I can select this outside face, and this will take us just down to the top. If we use this offset value, let's say -3 millimeters, it will cut into our part 3 millimeters. If we increase that, it'll go in this case, 5 millimeters. Now, it is important to note that if we simply do a cut, we will not be able to easily get the body that we want in the center of that piece, right? The goal here is to have this sort of replaceable body or this extra piece. We don't just want to cut it and remove it. So instead of doing a cut, I'm going to do a new body. And when we do a new body, if we expand the bodies folder, we now have the bottom of this, which matches the shape we want, and it's at the correct distance that we want, and the original is left untouched. That's an important aspect of this first process because now that gives us the ability to create the overlapping section using tools like combine or boundary fill, and then we can continue to model from there. So this first method, what we're going to do is I'm going to create a copy of this body. So just Control C and Control V and hide the original. And I'm just going to call this one ORIG for original. So I don't necessarily need to do it with this method, but I like to have that copy there just in case I want to use it. The next thing that I'm going to do is use combine. Now in combine, the target and the tool bodies are important. The target body is going to be whatever you want to remove from. So for example, if we were using cut, if we wanted to remove from the main chain guard, that's the one that we would select. However, we have this option called keep tools, and keep tools is important when we're using the intersect option. In this case, what we want is the tool body to be the chain guard and the target body to be this top piece. Now they both overlap, so essentially it will give us the same result either way, but the keep tools allows us to keep a copy of that original chain guard. So we're going to say okay. And now what we have is we've got this little piece that's removable, and we've got the chain guard, which is still untouched. So again, I didn't have to make a copy of that original. The chain guard is still here. Now, one downside to this method here is that the tool is gone. The original extrude is now gone. Now we could take this and use tools like press pull, and we could thicken it so that it sticks through the solid body if we want to. But again, that original sort of extrude where we were just going straight down into the part, that piece is now gone. So if you need to maintain that piece for some reason, then the combine intersect method is probably not the right way to go. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and hit delete. We're going to go back and we're going to take a look at another method. Now if we go to create and boundary fill. Now boundary fill is a fairly powerful tool, but recently with the last Fusion update, there have been problems with it, and just from its inception, there have been problems with this tool. Now you can use this tool on solid bodies, surface bodies, you can use planes as references, and it's a great way to build things like fluid volumes inside of parts. Now, where I've found that this has become problematic is that the selection of these cells here has been very difficult, especially when you're selecting through other geometry. So for example, I'm trying to, and I can't click on that cell. If I hold down the left mouse button, it won't even let me click on that cell. And same thing over here, you can see that it's automatically grabbing this cell here. Now in this case, if I hold down the left mouse button, it brings up this sort of empty dialog box, and this does actually let me select those different areas. And what I'm gonna do to get started is I'm gonna use the new body option, and I'm gonna leave remove tools unchecked. I'm gonna say okay, so we can see the result. If we hide the original bodies, the body 2 and body 3, you can see that the result that we have is that centerpiece that we're left with. Now, if I double click and go back into here and I say remove tools, what's going to happen is those two tool bodies, those two original bodies, body 2 and 3, they have now been removed from the design. Now, this can be a helpful feature, especially when you're trying to minimize the number of things that you have in your browser. However, we want to keep those things. So again, you can check that or you can leave it unchecked and decide whether or not you want to keep those originals. Now the originals will not have the cut through them. So again, this can be a helpful way that you can build out these features. Now I should also note that this creates a new body. We could use things like join, cut, and intersect in here as well. They get a little bit trickier than using combine, but it does give you a few more options because you can use things like offset surfaces or planes as those tools that you can use to create your new geometry. So essentially what we did was we looked at two different ways, combine and boundary fill, to get to the same exact result. Now, the problem that we have here is we still need an offset. We need a little bit of a gap between these parts. Now, in some cases, you might need a gap in just one direction, or in this case, X and Y, but we don't necessarily want a gap off of the bottom of this face. So when you get into a situation like this, when you start designing, a couple of different ways that you can approach this. One way is to create a copy of the original, and then in your original sketch, have an offset that you extrude down to a certain height. And that would be a very valid way to do it. And in fact, let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm going to right click and just create a new sketch on the back of this face. And I'm going to use offset. And let's say that we want, we'll do a millimeter. That'll be fine. We'll do 1 millimeter, and then we'll finish that sketch. Now, if I hide this body and I bring back this original, or in this case, the copy of the original, what I can do is I can extrude this and make sure that we do grab that little region as well. We're going to go down to an object, and again, offset is minus 5 millimeters. So we're going to cut all the way into it. What this allows me to do is it allows me to cut into my object. I still have this piece here, and I still have the original. So the original will let me use the combine to sort of manufacture those two pieces. But we also created that boundary fill piece. So the boundary fill piece, we can see that we've got this 1 millimeter difference between those two. And if I want to create the piece that goes inside of them, I can just use combine and intersect, and just keep the intersection between these two. I don't need to worry about keeping tools in this case. And what we end up with is this body that's got that slight little gap to it. Okay, so this is, again, one method. There are many different ways that we can do this. That's just one method. This method is probably going to be the easiest in most cases. But what I've found through practice is that things like this, when you figure out how to do it, they're usually on an ideal case. And oftentimes what you end up with is you end up running into problems where you need to come up with a creative solution. So let's talk about a creative solution to this problem. So I'm going to just delete this combine because I want this piece, this body right here, and I want to focus my attention on this. So I'm going to go to my surface tools. I'm going to go to create an offset. And I'm going to offset the entire outside of this body. So I'm going to rotate it around. And what I want to do is I want to offset this, the total distance, in this case 1 millimeter, the total amount that I want to create the gap between the two pieces. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this thing around. We're going to create another offset. This time it's going to be 0 millimeters on that bottom piece. So essentially what we've done is we've sort of created this bottom piece that's the exact size, and then we've created this offset that gives us the gap that we need between the parts. So then what we can do is we can extend all of these edges out. Let's just take a while just selecting all these edges. We're going to rotate and come around to this side. And what we want to do is we want to just create an overlap. So if I say 1 millimeter, theoretically it should meet perfectly. Instead of free edges, I'm going to say aligned edges. See if that gives me a good solution. There's a little bit of a seam or something there in the corner. Could potentially be a problem, but it looks okay. I think that it's an okay solution. And then I can stitch them together. Now you might be thinking, well, there's a gap there. You can see these red sections. Well, if we increase the tolerance and we get those edges to turn green, Fusion will patch them. Now, Fusion generally will take the path of least resistance. So in this case, extending these faces, which are essentially planar, extending them down is going to be the path of least resistance. So in a case like this, with this geometry, I was fairly confident that it would patch it how I intended it. We could, of course, go back to that original offset and we could extend that down, we could trim them. It just takes more features to get that done. So at this point, we now have this body, which is an open surface body, and potentially we have a version of the original. You can see we have this version of the original body that still has the geometry in it. So once again, I'm going to just do a copy and paste just to make a copy of it so we can have the original to play with if we want to. So now that we have this surface, we can either do a split body or we could patch the top of this and we could turn it into a solid and use combine from there. I'm going to use split body because there's a benefit to doing a split body here. So we're going to split the solid. The splitting tool is the surface that we created. And we don't need to extend the splitting tool because it goes exactly where we want it. And if we hide the splitting tool, we now have this little piece in here and we've got this original body. If we hide that little piece, you can see that we've removed it just by doing the split body. Now, the reason that this is a potentially good option is because we can take this surface and we can offset it inward, and then we could create another split body to cut that piece away. There are some other tools that we can use, things like press pull or offset face. So for example, if I select these side faces, I'm going to go ahead and actually I'm going to go ahead and select all of them so you can see how this works. We're going to go ahead and select all the faces, just holding down Shift to rotate around, and then just selecting each face. The way that this works is it's got an automatic option, which determines whether or not it can modify the original feature or if it's going to make a new offset. We can automatically select new offset if we want to make sure that it doesn't affect any of the original. I'm going to say -1 millimeter, and you can see that it shrunk that down for me. So that press pull tool is actually pretty good. And what it does is it invokes the offset face tool. So you can go directly to offset face if you want. In some cases, you might want to use move copy, and you can move a face around if you need to. But this essentially gives us the solution that we're looking for. So I'm going to use my section plane here. And you can see when we look at this thing from the side, we've got the gap where we want it. And then we've got essentially matching curvature in the middle part. Now you can see that there is a slight difference here between the curvature, and that is going to be something that you have to deal with, especially when you begin extending surfaces out. So it's, in my mind, it's generally a good idea to cut away the bigger version and then shrink the part down rather than to cut away the smaller version and increase the size of the part. Just in general, it seems to work better because instead of trying to add new geometry, you're taking away, which means that the extents of your surface or solid body are going to remain the same. Now, I mentioned that there are tons of different ways that we can do this type of process, and this is not the only way. So let's take a look at another solution. So I'm going to start a sketch on plane 1, which was that mid plane that I got, and I'm going to use the slice option in my sketch here. So the slice option allows me to temporarily create a section view. I'm going to go into create, project, include, and intersect. Then I'm going to intersect this bottom face. And what this allows me to do is create an offset of that bottom face. So if I want to come in 5 millimeters, I do an offset of -5. I use my line tool and just sort of fill these in on the outside. And now that sketch can be used to extrude. Now, in this case, it works okay simply for the fact that this body is an extruded body. It doesn't have any complex curvature. But sometimes you might find that this is the easiest and probably the best method for you. Now keep in mind that when we do extrude, we can also do things like intersect directly here, or we can create a new body and then use the tools that we've already looked at, combine, boundary fill, create a surface offset, and so on. So just keep in mind that there are ways in which we can use this extrude to our advantage and then come back and do things like, again, the offsets and the extrudes and combines and things like that. So with this version, what I would typically do is I would take this, I would copy and paste it, just like we did before. And then with the copied version, I would shrink it down. Now, remember I said that shrinking it down is generally going to be better for the geometry than doing something like increasing the size. So we'll say -1 millimeter. So now we've got this original larger body. We're going to use combine. We're going to use subtract. The target will be our chain guard. The tool body will be this piece in here. We'll just simply remove it. And now we've got this piece that is slightly offset inward. And once again, if we take a look at a section analysis, go ahead and turn this on. You can see here that we've got, double click the mouse wheel, that we've got something that matches the inside shape, again, because we did a section, we offset, we did an extrude cut, and then we shrunk it down. So it really is going to match that geometry. Where on the top side, you might find that the piece here might not match perfectly if we start to do some surfacing tools where we allow it some leniency in how it extends and knits things together. Most of the time it'll be okay, but in some cases it's not going to be okay. So those are a handful of ways that we can achieve the same or very similar results. And as I mentioned, there's not really one right or wrong way when you approach problems like this. You have to consider all the factors. You have to think about the different geometry that you're dealing with. And again, this was a case where everything was just extruded out. So I'm only dealing with curvature in one direction, essentially, not in 3D, really just in 2D. I'm only looking at curvature in the XZ plane. And that simplifies things a little bit, but the process still works fine depending on what your curvature is, but the process still works fine no matter how you create the geometry. Now, again, the couple of rules that I would follow is if you are trying to go about this process where you're shrinking or extending pieces, I would always go toward making your tools bigger and then shrinking them down. As you're removing geometry away, you know that the fit is going to be good. When you start extending stuff out, oftentimes you'll find that the extension pieces might not fit exactly how you plan. If there are other ways that you think about doing this, please let me know. Again, just leave a comment below. And again, there is a new Discord channel. If you want to be a part of that, just send me an email, support@caducator.com. That's a good place for you to show off the projects that you've been working on, ask questions on anything that you've seen in videos, or any CAD related or general questions as well. So if you have any questions at all, please let me know. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.